And welcome to Liberty Under Attack Radio, your home for anarchism in action. I'm your host, Shane. This podcast, everything found on the website, is covered by BIPCOT, no government license. This allows reuse and modification to anyone except governments and the belligees thereof. You can learn more by visiting bipcot.org. So a special welcome to the folks getting early access to this episode on YouTube. It'll be at least a week or so before it gets put out on the podcast feed, as I'm transitioning server host now, or website host, and it's a little complicated with the LUA site being 35 gigabytes. It's a little more of a complicated process. But anyways, it's great to have you here. Please feel free to drop any questions, comments, and chat. Subscribe to the channel and share this video around. My special guest today is someone I've recently become familiar with, I guess probably in the past 30 days. And in the past few weeks, I've watched every single video on his YouTube channel. He's in the midst of a Crypto-Anarchism series wherein he interviewed the likes of Jim Bell, Timothy May, and Cody Wilson, the latter of which I watched all the way through on 3 different occasions. He's also an Austrian economist and a Bitcoin maximalist with quite a negative outlook upon every single altcoin. His podcasts have been challenging intellectually, and I've learned quite a deal in just a short few weeks. Let me just say, I've been excited for this interview. So JW Weatherman, welcome to Liberty Under Attack Radio, man, and I guess also kind of the Vonnie podcast, too, because I'll put it out on there, because we're in the midst of a Crypto-Anarchism series on that one. So anyways, how's it going, man?
It's going really, really good. I'm really excited to talk to you guys and dig through all your content too, because it sounds like we're kindred spirits.
Right. Yes. We were talking in pre-show about my audience and how you're purely apolitical. I mean, in the show intro that I'll add to this in the podcast feed. I mean, it's just railing against the Libertarian Party and stuff. So yes, solutions. How to actually find freedom, because politics is not the way to go about doing that. So first off, man, great work on the incredible content over there on your YouTube channel, which I'll put in the show notes, and it's also on screen as well. But my favorite so far is the interview with Cody Wilson. But obviously Tim May and Lynn Ulbricht are close second. But how was it talking to Cody? I live in Austin. I haven't talked to Cody yet.
Oh, it was really great. I obviously been a fan of Cody for a while, and it was really nice. I mean, he's a very laid back, personable, interesting dude. And I think you get that like more in the second hour. I used to try to think that I needed to cut down the podcasts. And when I did a few of the first ones, I was really trying to keep it under an hour. And I've gone back and forth, but especially that Cody interview just re-solidified my commitment to doing the long form stuff, because it's like the second hour after you've covered all the stuff that gets all of the really important stuff out of the way. Then you can just kind of relax and just talk like person to person more, and that's where I feel like I get a lot more out of the conversation. And but yeah, it was really great. I mean, he's definitely the kind of guy that I would hang out with if I wasn't doing this sort of stuff.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And if you just look at what the media plays of him in his interviews, you don't really get that deeply philosophical, I guess, deeply intelligent. I guess obviously you can tell he's intelligent in the interviews, but that kind of deeply intellectual side with his deep study of philosophy. And there's a video on YouTube I've watched a couple times all the way through, and this was back in like 2013. So he's like 24 years old, and he was kind of explaining the philosophy of why they're doing the 3D printed gun. And the dude is brilliant. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. At age 24, and that's I guess it was a speech that he gave, or a lecture he gave back in college. So. Yeah, really, really incredible guy. Glad you got to talk to him. But yeah, like I said, I watched it through all the way through 3 times, and you're definitely a really, really great interviewer, and you obviously understand crypto-anarchism, so that's absolutely great.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks. It really was fun. I think one of the things that was something that I know that's out there, but it didn't really hit me until I talked to him, how much Julian Assange influenced Cody, and just how powerful that is. Like, the crypto-anarchist movement has inspired generation after generation of people. It's only 30 years old, but group after group of people have kind of realized that this is the right way to do things. This is the way that we can make an impact and make the world a better place. And it's super interesting and fun for me to sort of trace that intellectual lineage a little bit. So I wasn't aware that was such a direct tie, but it made a lot of sense after talking to him. It's it definitely makes me more and more hopeful I don't think there's a ton of us. We're probably numbered in the thousands, but that unreasonably outsized impact that we can have is really encouraging when you realize that there are a bunch of these different threads of people that are working for the same goals and are really really effective.
Right, right, and you made a good point there. I mean, this is a pretty the cypherpunks and crypto-anarchism is a pretty new thing, and just look at all that's gotten done in 30 years, with all of the implementations of privacy on the internet, public key encryption, Bitcoin, just all sorts of stuff stuff. It's really, really, I guess, life-changing and world-changing technologies, and it's really, really just the beginning. And I feel like for folks that focus on politics and the news cycle, it's just this swamp of despair. And there's really no hope, obviously. But if you take a step outside of politics and look at the cypherpunks and crypto-anarchism and all of the really incredible things that are happening there, obviously especially with Bitcoin, there's a lot to be hopeful for. The state really does not understand this technology. They don't understand it, and that the crypto-anarchists can get really far ahead before the state even knows what really happened. So there's a lot to be hopeful for, as long as you stay outside of the political realm, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think I don't think that's accidental. I think that politics is basically a crumple zone for outrage. So it takes all of our energy and our desire to sort of throw off the shackles that we have, and it just absorbs them. Right? It allows us to pick your path. So a Democrat, Republican, and then within that, pick your path. And by the time you get to the end, you're out of energy. Right? It's just slowly sapped away any hope that you had for making the world a better place. And I think that there's a good reason for that phenomenon, and it is that if you're trying to change the world through politics or education, you're kind of trying to change human nature, right? Like if you think about it, what really is gonna change here? Like we're all basically the same people that we were 1,000 years ago. Why don't we still have racial slavery, for example? It's not because there was really, really eloquent people that convinced us that racial slavery was a bad idea. And that's sort of the hopelessness of trying to go after this with politics, or Mises University trying to go after the purely education route, which really, I mean, let's face it, those guys are trying to educate people and motivate them to deal in politics. So it's ultimately a political solution anyway. But I think that's why it's really hopeless. On the other hand, we have stuff like the internet, and we have stuff like e-commerce, and we have stuff like Bitcoin, and WikiLeaks has had a pretty big impact for just a few people that have worked on that project. We have things like Cody Wilson's 3D printed gun. And the thing that all of those have in common is they're just building new tools. I don't have to change human nature. I don't have to make people, more selfless or more intelligent or anything else. I can just build tools and put them in their hands, and that'll change the outcome. We'll change the environment, not the nature of people. If it's cheaper for me to defend myself, I'm going to defend myself more. Like we know that from economics. It's simple. It's easy.
Yeah, exactly. And in the realm of Vonu, which I guess it's to explain it real briefly, was I guess a freedom strategy developed largely by a guy named Rayo back in the 1960s. It's kind of this lost libertarian, philosophy and I guess method of, or I guess strategies of direct action. And he has this idea called, he calls it, it's basically just mainstream society. But he calls it the state of servile society. And what I really, really appreciate about crypto-anarchism and other solutions that aren't geared towards changing hearts and minds is that the nature of the servile society, the nature of man can stay the same. And Vonu was just premised upon making radical lifestyle changes in pursuance of freedom, recognizing that the state of servile society has always been here. There will always be people who clamor for handouts from the government. So there will always be those folks that I guess desperately want to get into those positions of power, and there'll be people that will allow it. So any strategy or solution not premised upon changing hearts and minds or changing the nature of man or the nature of society, I'm heavily in favor of. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, because education's been there for a long time. That was kind of how the libertarian movement started back, I think in like 1930s or 40s with Fee, and I mean. People, more people might have, come to Austrian economics, and that's great. But I guess my main shtick with anarcho-capitalists and I guess the pure theorists is that there's really no action. It's in this hypothetical free society in the future, this is how things could operate. And it's like, well, what about now? The state exists, and we're all enslaved. So what are we going to do about this now? And it's just kind of crickets, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am a huge fan of Murray Rothbard. I talk about him probably too much in some ways, but one of the things that I think is a problem with what he did, or at least didn't take it far enough, is he took from Mises's solid understanding of economics and he applied that to government, and that's huge, and it had a lot of implications. If monopoly services give us bad results, what about monopoly services provided by the government? Shouldn't we expect them to give us bad results? So I think there's a ton of value, and I'm definitely a fan of his work. But I think one of the things that he didn't do very effectively, and it's something that I kind of ignored for a while, but the pushback that a lot of people have on, well, why isn't there a libertarian world right now? Why isn't there a stretch of earth where you have this libertarian utopia you can point to? And I think that his response to that was a little bit weak. In some places, he said, look, worst case scenario, we end up with a state again, right? And that's a little bit true, right? But it's also a little bit of a deflection. I think if you look at that problem head on and you stare at it for a while, you end up saying, well, actually, yeah, it doesn't work, right? The cost of defending is just simply more expensive than the cost of attacking. We don't have roves of wild men, going around and killing everybody in the village and taking their stuff. But it's not because the nature of man changed. It's because we ended up with, other structures or other things that made that too expensive. And one of those things is actually that we're all essentially enslaved, and our slave owners put a little bit of work into making sure that that doesn't happen. So how do we end up in a world where we have freedom? The answer is we have to make it more expensive to attack than it is to defend. And one of his answers was maybe we could do that with insurance. Maybe, we would have a free market of private defense. And I think that is, a lot of the times he said stuff that was so profound to me that it just blew me away to the point where I wasn't as critical as I should have been. And I think these are a couple of those spots. But the response to that is, okay, great. Why don't we have that? Why don't we have the ability to buy insurance to protect ourselves right now? And more importantly, what's going to change so that we end up in a place where we can do that? And I think the cypherpunk movement is responsible for having that knowledge and saying the answer is not just technology broadly, which I feel like somebody like Rothbard should have got that, frankly, but that's kind of like looking at a hero and saying, they should have saved 103 people instead of just 102. So it's hard for me to be critical. But when I do look at things like the Mises Institute and Rothbard's legacy right now, I think that's even more frustrating, because for those guys living in 2018, it is very obvious, in my opinion, that the only way forward is through building tools and through technology. And I think the cypherpunk movement saw that, but then they also saw that within that, it's not just tools and technology broadly, it's specifically software, encryption, computer networks is our most likely path of success. And I think that's true today, and I think that's why we've made progress. And I would like more of the ANCAPs out there to get that point, that it's not good enough to want to get here. Now the question is strategy. How do we get there? And the answer is obviously build tools. There's at this point in time, it's obviously build tools.
Right. And not to take anything away from Rothbard or Mises. When I first found anarchism back in 2015, that was the next 6 months of my life was just, reading a ton of books and trying to understand the philosophy and the theory. But there was a certain point where I said, okay, now could I learn all the million different nuances, within this, to, further elaborate my position? Sure, I could, but I've got this free market philosophy, this free market theory. Now, let me just see how I can work this into the real world. But I don't. A lot of people don't hit that point, unfortunately. I don't think. There's this idea that Rayo, the main proponent of Vani, talked about back in the '60s, and it's the duality of theory and so I guess philosophy and action, or theory and practice. One without the other isn't very useful. If you don't have a good philosophy backing your action, then you'll tend to blow with the winds of political expediency, or whatever great man sounds best to you. And if you just have theory without practice, not really existing in the real world, right? So I obviously don't take anything away from Rothbard or Mises, but I think as anarchists, I think one of the biggest motivations for doing what we do and talking about these ideas is that we want to see a free world. And so the question then becomes, well, how do we bring it into fruition? And I think that's something missing, unfortunately. And this is what Ray talked about this back in the 60s. He bitched and complained about it, and I understand why. Things really haven't changed that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to look back and say Rothbard should have realized that it was tools that would move us forward. But if it wasn't for Mises, we wouldn't have had Rothbard. If it wasn't for Rothbard, I tend to give Rothbard credit for this, even though I think the Friedmans were the connection between a lot of Rothbard's ideas and the cypherpunk movement. But I don't think those guys pioneered the stuff. I think it was really Rothbard that did that. So you got to give the guy credit. And he moved things forward so much for the time that he lived. So if it's like, he didn't move it far enough, whatever. But we've had a lot of time since Murray Rothbard was here, and he thought that maybe politics was the way to go forward, right? I mean, he spent a lot of time flailing around, frankly, trying to figure out what to do on the political front and trying to figure out how to educate people and build a movement. And he's got a huge legacy, and I do think the cypherpunk movement is part of his legacy just as much as he's part of Mises's legacy. But yeah, what's the excuse now, right? Like we've had a lot of time to see that politics doesn't seem to be very effective, and we've had a lot of time to see that technology is unreasonably effective, right? Just building tools. Yeah. So at this point in time, I think if Rothbard was alive today, he would absolutely get it, and he would be probably the biggest proponent of the cypherpunk movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. So I guess I didn't expect to go on you're talking about that for the first 20 minutes or so, but that's fantastic. I'm glad we got to talk about that. But I think since a lot of my listeners might be unfamiliar with you, let's kind of start with your background. Tell us a bit about you, how you got into Bitcoin, etc.
Yeah, so I have spent the last 20 so years of my life, most of my professional career as a software security expert. I've been an academic. Taught at a university, computer science and math. And I basically, for say the last 10 years, have done software startups, usually related to security. And after I sold my last company, I had some downtime, and it was kind of on my back burner to look into this crazy Linden Dollars meets SETI at home project that I had known some people were excited about, and I was pretty sure it was stupid because almost everything new has a pretty good chance of being stupid if you haven't had a chance to look into it, right? Most of the new projects that come out every year are dead within a few years. Because most of the time it's just hype, especially, you get really, really cynical after you work in security for a while, right? So it was on my list, and I finally got a chance to dig into it. And once I started looking into it, I was like, man, this is incredible. If it actually worked, how amazing would this be? Because I had spent enough time in economics to know that there's nothing more important right now for humans to flourish than if we could get our hands on a secure money or a sound money that's hard to steal or inflate. So I was kind of prepped to appreciate it if it worked, but I was still really skeptical about it. So I guess it was maybe 9 months ago or so, I decided that I'd do a threat model. And you can see the threat model that I wrote at btcthreats.com if you're interested. But basically, it's something that security people in general have been doing this for a long time. People that build buildings, nuclear power plants usually have a threat model. And the idea is a systematic list of all the things that an attacker could do, all the things that could go wrong, and what we're going to do, what safeguards we're going to put in place to prevent it. So I did that with Bitcoin. I looked at all the ways that I, as an attacker, and a software security guy, you're always thinking adversarially, right? If I wanted to break this thing, how would I go about it? Right. So I went through all the things that I would do to destroy it. And when I got done with that, I was just blown away. I couldn't think of a single thing that wasn't really well addressed by the software. And then I felt really dumb because because I was like, if I'd only taken the time to look into this sooner. You look at the price history and you're like, oh my gosh. So the way that the timing worked out for me, I don't regret it in the sense that I've solved a lot of interesting problems in my career, and I was solving interesting problems when other people were working on Bitcoin. So, but on the other hand, the way that it worked out, just the timing when I finally took the time to look into it and realized that it was going to work, I ended up buying it at the all-time high. So I think I am the world's worst Bitcoin investor to date, but I'm still feeling good about it because the technology is sound. So it'll work out in the long run.
Right, right. I definitely agree. I definitely agree. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So I guess so software security. I guess since you mentioned it, we'll talk a little bit about the Bitcoin threat model that you put out, which I read through, and I was really appreciative of, I guess, the way that it was laid out. It was a pretty quick read, but it got the point across. So I guess in your opinion, I mean, there really aren't any threats, but from your assessment, what are the most likely threats to the adoption of Bitcoin as cash?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the conclusion of the threat model is I don't see anything that's going to have a significant impact on the adoption, which is, it's an incredible statement, I know, because there's so much stuff going on. There's altcoins and there's the potential of government regulation and all those sort of things. But if you look at the threat model and you think of something that I haven't thought of, let me know and I'll add it. And when I look at all of those things and all of the reasons that I don't think that they're that big of a deal, I don't walk away with anything on my list where I can say I'm really particularly worried about that. That said, I think there's a couple threats that are more interesting. One is building an insecure sidechain. There's a couple projects right now, and there's a couple people right now that are really pushing the idea of a drive chain, which is the best way to think of this is just like a way to store Bitcoin in a separate network. And that separate network sort of holds the Bitcoin for you. And if that network gets destroyed or hacked, all the Bitcoin in that network could be stolen, but it couldn't affect Bitcoin originally. And the nice concept here is that you could build something that you could iterate on, and you could move faster, and you could break things, and you wouldn't have to worry about breaking the original network. You would
Right.
only, the downside is that if it is insecure and there's a lot of money there, a lot of Bitcoin can be stolen. So we could have sort of a Mt. Gox scenario. And even more than that, we could have a Mt. Gox scenario that some people know is coming, which would allow them to short and do market manipulation and cause other damage. So I think that's a real possibility. The idea of drive chains has a major security flaw in it. The folks that have come up with it are pushing it really aggressively, even though I've taken the time and other people have taken time, including the guy that actually came up with the original idea, Matt Corallo, has taken the time to explain he abandoned the idea because it has critical security flaws. But in spite of that, it's being pushed pretty aggressively. So it hasn't been built yet, and maybe it won't be, but there are people that are spending money to get it built. And if that ever happens, I think we could see it would be a hit, right? It's not gonna prevent adoption of Bitcoin, but it's one of those things that could slow it down a little bit, but it would be marginal. It'd be such a, on one hand, it's something that I worry about as a security person. On the other hand, even if it happened, I don't think that we would be able to say for sure when it was over if it slowed or accelerated adoption of Bitcoin. Because like with a lot of things related to Bitcoin, bad news is still news, right? So if something terrible happened and we were all over the press, more people might be interested in Bitcoin than were before, and that sort of the bad news could even outweigh the damage. So, but that's probably the nastiest thing that I see on the horizon. But all in all, even with stuff like that, it looks shockingly sound.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I know that's been kind of a big talk, is these side chains, and I do like the fact. I guess one of my a little background for me, or a little background on me, with Bitcoin. I first bought it in 2015, and with the sole intention of buying silver with it. I thought it'd be a cool experiment. Can I buy silver with Bitcoin? And it was a major pain to buy it because I looked at the white paper and I realized I probably it's probably a bad idea to attach a driver's license and and a social security number and all this stuff to it. So I was looking for places where I could buy it without providing any personal identifiable information, and it was a pain in the ass. It left a really bad taste in my mouth. But I was able to pull it off using VirWalk's virtual world exchange, where yes, it's basically a digital gaming currency website. So yeah, I trade my US dollars for I guess something like Linden dollars, and then I convert it into I convert it into cash or Bitcoin or whatever. So it's one of those sites, but it really it was a pain back then. And I guess with the onslaught of altcoins, claiming to solve all of Bitcoin's air quotes issues, I really wasn't knowledgeable on the technology at all. So I when the scaling debate came around with the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash fork, I don't know. I guess I was kind of frustrated that if Bitcoin needs to scale, then scale it. I mean, why is there such a big debate? If it needs to happen, why doesn't it just happen? And I realized later on, thanks to Andreas Antonopoulos, that the inability to change Bitcoin is not a flaw; it's a feature. It's extremely hard, if not damn near impossible, for one I guess section of the community to actually take over the protocol and implement changes. So, I mean, yeah, I did look into other altcoins at that time who were, supposedly solving, issues that Bitcoin had, but I guess the major one was the scaling. So I guess with these solutions that have been proposed so far, are there any scaling solutions that you see as, not a massive security threat?
Yeah, I think that whole issue. I mean, I kind of got in on the tail end of that, but as I've gone back and looked at it, it's really kind of fascinating. This whole space is fascinating because it sort of reminds me of and this may piss off some of your listeners, but like the vaccination debate, right? Like everybody has an opinion. It doesn't matter if they're an epidemiologist or not. It doesn't matter if they've read any of the literature or if they can even tell you why we finally figured out that bloodletting was a bad idea, right? And that's sort of like if you don't know how we figured out that bloodletting was a bad idea and you can't apply that to a lot of stuff, you're not even like a first year med student, right? Like you don't get to have an opinion on that topic. Even though, I get it, like the government has monopolized medicine and we really don't have any experts that we can look to. So, I am sympathetic with it. But the scaling debate was sort of like that, right? You have these really weird people that are saying, we should be able to scale Bitcoin, like really strange characters. Like if you were like a Silicon Valley angel investor and you showed up at Bitcoin and you saw these Bitcoin Cash guys like Calvin Ayre and Roger Ver, you would just be like, where am I? And I'm not saying that all those guys in Silicon Valley are brilliant, but man, I mean, it's like showing up into the middle of a trailer park. It's very disorienting for people that haven't lived like that. And that's how like just cheesy and weird that whole thing is. And then you have a lot of people in the middle that are trying to decide, like, should we be able to raise the block size or not? And I just want to be like, dude, you didn't even take like my computer science 101 class like 10 years ago. I'm not going to try to help you understand this is my initial thing. But then, just like vaccinations, it comes down to, well, you got to make a decision for your life, right? And ultimately, if you don't choose the right thing, you're going to suffer for it. And I'm probably going to suffer for it too. And that's part of the reason that, looking back at that history, I'm more willing to put a lot of time into trying to do Bitcoin education. But the block size debate thing, it really is a question of how big can you make that? How many transactions can you do in a short period of time without choking up the network? And if you choke up the network, you destroy the security. So that's a really important question to ask. And the answer can't be, well, let's just double it. Because when you're trying to build something like a global currency, you need to support millions of transactions per second, right? If you walked into Facebook and you said, hey, I've got this really great idea, guys. I know that we're growing at 10 times our user count per day. And I just realized that if we change this critical freaking security parameter, we might be able to double the number of users we can support. just look at you like you were a madman. And that is exactly what that whole debate was about. Let's see if we can go from supporting half a McDonald's franchise per day to supporting 2 McDonald's franchises per day by screwing with a parameter that, if we get it wrong, will completely destroy the network, and could be our only chance, right? We don't know if we can build another network like this without the vested interests and that don't want it to happen being able to prevent it, right? We think that we can, but we're not sure. So let's take all of this risk and uncertainty, like from a security professional or really just any technology professional's perspective. We were all just like, what in the heck are you guys doing over here? This is a very strange carnival that's being run. But fortunately it worked out. And I can't take credit for helping in any way, because I really wasn't here until it was basically resolved. But yeah, so that's obviously not the solution, right? So what are some solutions that have been proposed? I think side chains have a lot of potential. I'm not super excited about any one right now. We basically have 2 designs and a hybrid that is really just sort of trying to obscure the fact that they're doing one of the designs. So you can either do, and there may be more stuff, right? Like stuff in Bitcoin's moving really fast. But my current understanding is that you can either do a federated sidechain, or you can do a merge mine sidechain. And a merge mine sidechain is what I called an insecure sidechain design earlier, because it would not be good. And then a federated sidechain is basically what the guys at Blockstream are doing. They're calling it Liquid, and it's essentially a network of exchanges is the best way to think of it. So instead of like having Coinbase, you might have a network that includes Coinbase and maybe a dozen other companies, and 2/3 of those companies have to approve a transaction in order for it to be processed. That's interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, if 2/3 of the companies involved are crooked, your money is toast.
But yeah, and I'm not a big fan of Coinbase either. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm kind of excited about it, but it's not, it's a trade-off, right? So if something like Liquid exists, then there's some applications that are really obvious for it, right? Like exchanges that are settling with each other, or maybe a simpler way to say this is banks. If we have these Bitcoin banks like Coinbase, which we do, allowing those Bitcoin banks to exchange Bitcoin with each other really rapidly, with stuff that's more experimental and we don't want to have on Bitcoin right now, like confidential transactions. That's all good, right? There's certain applications where it's just no question that it's a good thing, even though I'm not putting my Bitcoin on it. There are applications where that makes a lot of sense. But the real exciting thing that's going on right now is Lightning. And Lightning has, because there's so much money involved, and PR firms and shill accounts and all kinds of weirdness, Lightning has sort of gotten a bad rap in some sectors of the Bitcoin community. But from like a competent technologist perspective, all we're talking about here is cleverly delayed Bitcoin transactions. So if I send you some money on Bitcoin, that can take, an hour. But if we work out a way where I can send you incremental amounts of Bitcoin that doesn't have to hit the Bitcoin chain because it's just delayed, and then we can overwrite those transactions, right? So like I can give you $100, and then you essentially can give me that $100 back when I give you $110 to give you 10 more. And then if you wanted to give me $20, I would basically, give you $90 and you would destroy the $110 that is in the transaction that you could put on Bitcoin, right? So they've been called IOUs, which I think is kind of it's a decent shortcut, but then it's it's vilified to the point where people are super confused. Because at the end of the day, these are all Bitcoin transactions that if anybody starts doing anything funny, just get put on the blockchain. But as long as you and I are playing nice, we can do thousands of transactions per second together that are real Bitcoin transactions that don't hit the Bitcoin network. And that's just really, really interesting and exciting. And I think that does get us to millions of transactions per second. And we already see a lot of Lightning transactions happening right now. So it's not like theoretical the way merge mine sidechains are. It's actually up and running. And I think the reason for that is that it was promising, right? Like you have a lot of really, really smart and competent people working in this space, and a design was discovered called Lightning, and it looked really good. And so it got built within a really pretty impressive period of time, which is another challenge with non-technical people is, I'm sure brain surgeons are always frustrated. Like, oh yeah, you just pop open the head and scoop out the tumor, right? That's not how this stuff works. This
Right.
stuff is really hard and it takes time.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I've read some stuff on Lightning, but I'm not a technologist by any means. I'm just on the outside trying to understand this because I think it's really powerful tools in pursuance of self-liberation and also helping to free others as well. So basically, from your explanation of kind of IOUs, if I wanted to send you money, you would get it, but it wouldn't actually be on the Bitcoin. It wouldn't actually. It would just be an off-chain transaction. And then how would these transactions settle onto the network? Would it be something on the lines of where you could have a whole slew of transactions off chain, and then they would get sent as a sent in bulk over to the Bitcoin blockchain for confirmation? How does this kind of work?
Yeah, basically the way that it works is if you and I want to send each other money, and actually it's a network too. So I'll explain it at a high level if it's just you and me, and then I'll explain how it would work if there was another person involved. So
Sure.
If you and I are sending each other money, I can create a Bitcoin transaction. I can sign it with my private keys, right? Like the private password that I have that nobody else is supposed to see. And that's a valid Bitcoin transaction. So let's say I send it to you and it's $10. Well, you could at any time take that $10 and you could broadcast it to the Bitcoin network. So you can kind of think of this as like maybe a draft email, right? It's an email that's written, I've digitally signed it or provided my password or done whatever. And all anybody has to do is drop it on the network and it goes. But you take that and you know that you can drop it on the network at any time and nobody can stop you from doing it. And you treat that as if it's $10, right? Because it's worth $10. Because if you want to turn it into $10 worth of Bitcoin, you just drop it on the network. But instead of dropping it on the network, you hold on to it. And then if you need to send me money, you've got $10 that I've sent you, and you need to send me money. You could, let's say you needed to send me $3. You could create a new transaction for $7 from me to you. And that would invalidate the first transaction. And so if you sign it and I sign it, we do the dance that we need to do for that transaction to be valid. It also invalidates the previous transaction, right?
Right.
And so now I've only paid you $7. Really what's happened is I paid you 10 and then you paid me 3. But this can go back and forth, thousands of times a second. And one of the really nice things about it is from a privacy standpoint, nobody knows that this is happening except for you and me. So all of our exchanges are not happening on the public visible blockchain as transactions. Now, what's cool is because it's a network, if you and I can do this, well, what if we have Bob and he's on the other side of you? And I need to send money to Bob. Well, you and I can do this little thing with updating transactions that never go on the network so that you know that you have money from me, and then you could send money to Bob and maybe charge a really small fee, like 5 Satoshis in between in order to send money to Bob. And even that doesn't have to go to the Bitcoin network. So you can chain a bunch of people together or a bunch of Lightning nodes together to create this internet of money sort of scenario where all we're doing is we're updating Bitcoin transactions and invalidating previous Bitcoin transactions, but we can actually move incredible amounts of value. And the really nice thing is that it's instant confirmation. If I hand you something and it's already pre-signed and it's ready to go, and you know that if you want, you can put it on the Bitcoin network and it will be confirmed, then you've got something that actually represents that money as soon as those bits arrive in your computer or in your smartphone
Right.
or whatever. So that's amazing. I mean, it's amazing on privacy. It's amazing on speed, and it obviously it's really, really good for scalability. So yeah, it's a really incredible system. And at this point, we can definitely say it's not theoretical. I don't know how many millions of dollars are on the Lightning Network right now and are being pushed around, but it's not small, which is pretty impressive. Like if you look at the amount of Bitcoin and the number of transactions that are happening, or at least the amount of value that's being pushed around, and you consider that there's not even an iOS app for the iPhone yet. Like
Right.
that's how early we are with this stuff. But it's far further than a theoretical white paper at this point. Yeah, from a security standpoint, it looks pretty good. That doesn't mean there's not going to be like issues around the edges, and there's not going to be somebody that loses money here and there because of some design flaw or some implementation flaw, I should say. But there's not like major design flaws. It's not like just increasing the block size to a terabyte or 30 megabytes or something like that, where we know that it has really bad side effects.
Right, exactly. And I think something, and I have to remind myself this, because back in 2016, did an episode on, did an episode here on Liberty Tech Radio on Jim Bell's, Jim Bell's, set of articles on assassination politics. And I was like, what the hell, man? Like, we've got blockchains, we've got Bitcoin. Like, why isn't this a thing yet? And I guess it's important to realize that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and especially if it's going to be something that's marketed to a lot of people, it has to be secure. So these things definitely don't happen overnight. But I guess the other thing I was what you're talking about with Lightning leads to my next point, or I guess the next point of discussion, and that. That was my major issue with Bitcoin for a long time, was the fact that it was kind of pseudonymous, right? I mean, everything is put on a public ledger, and how much privacy really is there when the NSA's crypto-analysts can just go in there and track back transactions and all of that sort of stuff. So in all honesty, I'll be completely honest with you here, JW. I'm ready for you to tell me how wrong I am, because I heard your interview with Fluffy Pony. But that's why, like, for the longest time, Monero is my favorite cryptocurrency, because privacy is absolutely crucial, especially if especially even in the realm of money. So that's positive to hear about Lightning. And plus, on top of that, if you just practice good security culture with Bitcoin, stay off the major exchanges, the major centralized exchanges that will report your earnings to the IRS. And if you use other tools, I think there's actually a privacy wallet out now that someone sent me a link to, but I don't remember what it's called. But apparently, the privacy is it's getting there on Bitcoin, but it's been a little while. So I'm really happy to hear about the privacy implications of Lightning and all of that, because it seems like a long time coming, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is a long time coming. Think about what it's like to be Tim May or Nick Szabo or any of these guys that have been, waiting for 30 years for it to come. But it just depends. It's like a lot of things in the real world. In fantasy land, everything happens fast and is amazing. In the real world, depending on how you're looking at it, it's either been really fast or really slow. Like for me, I get to enjoy it and be like, wow, this is incredible. Because I've only been here like 9 months, and I've only been an Austrian for maybe 10 years, and so the pace feels really, really good. And I've also done software startups, and I've just had the crap kicked out of me time and time again on really hard problems in the technology space, and realized a lot of times the really hard problem I'm working on has been being worked on for 40 years. Like from the very beginning of computer science, some of this stuff has been being worked on. I mean, as an example, my contacts in my phone are a disaster, right? Like this should be really, really easy, but all of the different services that I've used, I have like 6,000 contacts. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm always, trying to make connections with other successful people that I can help out and that can help me out. And it's a complete nightmare. Like my contacts are totally disorganized. Now you would think at this point in 2018, I could go out to some web application, they could download the contacts from my phone, they could figure out the duplicates, clean all that stuff up, and give it back to me, because this is a very basic problem of computer science that goes back decades. And right now, I can't. Right? Like that's the reality of it. So a lot of these problems, they look easy until you start digging into them. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I tried to figure out what time is this thing going to happen, and then you realize, oh my gosh, time is a nightmare. Like the way that we keep track of time goes back to the Babylonians. We have like all these weird things that happen every year at the end of the year. Like you start figuring out time zones. And I mean, if you want to, that's a good example of something that looks really, really really simple to a layman. But then after you dig into it, and you can find a YouTube video if you just search for like computer time problem, and it'll just blow your mind that it is such a hard problem to know what time it is right now that we don't even know how to do that very effectively. And it screws us up in our applications on a regular basis. That's the world as it actually is. It's freaking hard. So when we're talking about some like privacy and Monero and the pace of innovation on Bitcoin, I think hardened professionals that have been kicked around are going to look at it from that perspective, that stuff is really, really difficult, and that we shouldn't really even have Bitcoin right now. Like, it's way too good to be true. It works way too good for what it is. It has way too much promise. We're probably missing something, and this whole thing is going to blow up. Like, that's the perspective that you should have if you're a hardened professional. But something like Monero, just, it doesn't make sense because it's sort of like it's forgetting what the context is, right? Like, the goal here is not to create private transactions. The goal is to create a government hard money that prevents governments from being able to take our money and inflate it or easily steal it from us. Privacy is part of that. But if all we have is privacy and we have like no transactions that we can process, or all we have is privacy and we have no ability to prevent somebody from spinning up some miners and 51% attacking the network cost effectively, then, it's like a one-legged stool. Like, anybody can build a really good one-legged stool, but it's useless. If you're trying to build money, you got to build money. And part of that is privacy, but part of it is being able to scale. And a big part of it is security, right? Like, if it's not secure, then what's the point? And that's the category that Monero falls into. It's just not secure because they've sacrificed other stuff. That said, privacy on Bitcoin isn't like what we would like it to be, but it's okay if it's not perfect. Like, how good does it need to be in order to accomplish the mission of creating a secure money? Because, the NSA is funded, right? If the NSA wasn't funded, then we wouldn't have to be quite as worried about privacy. So it just needs to be good enough to where all of us can use it, and we can use it to defend the federal government. At least, I think probably critically, but at least enough to where they can't fund unpopular projects like, spying on civilians at scale, which is really, really expensive. And I think if it wasn't for the Fed, it wouldn't exist. So we just need it to be that secure. We're going to get, in my opinion, most of our privacy and most of our freedom because the people that would otherwise be attacking us just don't bother. But that said, I wish privacy was a little bit better on Bitcoin. I think Lightning gets us there. Confidential transactions, a lot of people are frustrated with. And this is a good example of, even like as hardened as I am and expecting things to be hard, there was a time maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I was like, why don't we have confidential transactions on Bitcoin yet? Like, it exists, it's on Liquid, it's been pretty thoroughly tested. What's the timeline here? And when I talked to a couple smart people, I got even more assured than I would have been if they had said, we're going to do it next month. They said, look, we get it. It's valuable, but it has downsides, right? And that's when somebody like me shuts up and listens. And the downside of doing something that's totally confidential is that if there was a flaw found in Bitcoin that allowed you to inflate the money supply, which, we don't think that it's there, but this stuff is really, really important. So we want to have like 3 or 4 layers of checks, right?
Sure.
So if that was ever discovered and somebody could silently inflate the money supply, we would be totally screwed. As Bitcoin stands right now, you always see the amounts of every transaction and the open balance on every UTXO. So I can tell you down to the Satoshi exactly how many Bitcoin exist. And I can tell you for sure that there hasn't been a flaw discovered that allows people to create more than the cap. That might not be worth giving up. Even just that confidence that it's not possible is so valuable that it might not be worth hiding the transaction amounts. And so, I mean, from my perspective, I was more reassured because it tells me that there's really, really smart people that are a couple steps ahead of me, and they're really thinking this stuff through in a painstaking way. And you know what? We're gonna do interesting stuff. I think the wallet that you were talking about is the Wasabi wallet.
Yes, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, Nopara is a really brilliant guy, and he's constantly thinking about these problems and trying to push things forward. And so like something like just really a good mixing system, right, where all of my transactions go into a big bucket and then go out. That doesn't have any real downsides from a monetary policy perspective. It could get us a lot further. But those are the sort of really difficult trade-offs that are happening in Bitcoin. The reason that you don't see that stuff happening in the altcoin space is that they're not really trying there. All they're trying to do is scavenge together enough nonsense to be able to get some dumb money. They're not actually trying to create a solution to secure and sound money.
Interesting. Okay, very, very good. So I guess I want to get your thoughts on this other thing too. And what really brought me around, like I said, the main issue that I had with Bitcoin was, you know, the everything being public and the ability for the state to use cryptanalysis to, you know, figure out, you know, who sent what wallets belong to whom, and what addresses belong to whom, and all that sort of stuff. That was until I started watching Andreas Antonopoulos' presentations on YouTube. And I'll tell you what, I mean, I didn't understand this. I honestly, up until probably the end of last year, I did not understand the significance of Bitcoin. Even if it, you know, even as you said, you know, even if, you know, even though it's not as private as we'd like it to be, it is a really incredible thing, right? And that was, you know, kind of what Andreas explained to me. That's it's not blockchain, it's Bitcoin. Without all of these other mechanisms, proof of work and decentralization and consensus, you know, blockchain is just kind of this useless term, most often used now to, you know, get funding for various projects. So I guess, you know, Andreas really brought me around to understanding the importance of Bitcoin, and I'd like to get your thoughts on him, and I guess his impact on, you know, I guess adoption of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think he's a huge asset for Bitcoin. I think he's done. He's obviously a really brilliant speaker, and he's got a pretty good grasp of what's going on most of the time, and does a really good job communicating that. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about him is that he's a very like I want to say emotional speaker, but he communicates sort of passion to people that gets them motivated enough to do the work of actually looking into whether this thing's going to work. So yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of his. I think, you know, I know that like all humans, you know, he's a mixed bag, right? There's been some security things that maybe he didn't call right away or didn't call the best. And, you know, he gets a lot of flack for writing the Ethereum book, you know, from me also, right? Like, even though I'm a fan, I will definitely make fun of him for that. You know, if we were friends, I would kick him in the nuts over that book probably annually for the rest of his life. But he's still a really good guy. And I think overall has been a massive help for Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And it goes beyond just, I guess, educating people on Bitcoin. I mean, he's done educating, you know, I guess, amateurs or noobs like me on Bitcoin, but he's also done some really interesting, I guess, kind of more geared towards, you know, programmers and developers, which I find really, really valuable as I'm trying to, you know, understand all of this technology. So I guess a little tongue in cheek. So we've talked a lot about Bitcoin, and you've kind of, you know, slid some things in there with Monero and such. But I guess, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek question. Now, what's your favorite altcoin?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like saying, what's your favorite fraud, right? What's your favorite scam that is basically designed to part people with their money and slow the abolition of human slavery? That's a really tough one. You know what? I'm gonna go with Litecoin because it brings me the most. It's the most, you know what? Actually, I have a better answer for that. I have a coin that I created in order to make fun of all of this called Number 2 coin. And Number 2 coin is exactly like Litecoin. It's exactly like Bitcoin Cash. The only difference with Number 2 coin is I didn't intentionally introduce any security flaws into it. So I've got a video where I show you my patented development process for creating Number 2 coin, which is basically just copy Bitcoin. But that's my favorite altcoin. Even though it's totally worthless, it's honest about it.
Sure. So I guess so you kind of elaborated to it, or I guess kind of you know, talked about it there. But I mean, so with all the altcoins out there, I know there's There's a lot of really really awful projects and such. But I guess and you mentioned Monero. I mean, that would be, in my opinion, like the highest use case altcoin, because there's privacy there. So you don't really see anything in anything in any of these altcoins, any of these projects and these developments that could be beneficial, or I guess asked another way, that could be beneficial and applied to Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because a lot of people think that competition is good, and they're right about that, of course. And they think, well, if you have all these different competing projects, it's more important that there's the ecosystem as a whole, and there's going to be like good, valuable things, and open source software is going to result in those things popping around and finding good footing. That would be great if that's what was happening, and a lot of us that are pro Bitcoin would like to see that happen, right? Because there are, like, open source software is very collaborative because it's open source. Like if there were two database systems that were trying to build an email server, and they were coding away, they would look at each other's stuff and they might get ideas from each other, and they would actually just copy whole sections of code potentially, right? Because that's the whole idea, is you can, it's free, it's the source code's available. Take it, leave it, do what you want, right? Mm-hmm. And then, maybe those two projects would merge, or maybe they would split into 15 other projects, because 15 of the contributors, once you get to, 1,200 contributors on a project, maybe there's enough people with slightly different ideas to where they fork the project and they go work on their own thing. And then eventually they bring those ideas back home, right? Or you just end up with 15 different database servers that have different strengths and weaknesses, and that's all good. That's kind of how people think, if they have any idea of open source software. That's what they think is happening in this space, but it's just not. And it's not because basically you have competent people and you have incompetent people in this space. And because money is sort of like the internet protocol, like TCP/IP or Ethernet or something like that, it's really only valuable if it's one thing, right? If you've studied Austrian economics, even Hayek talks about money as being sort of this information network, right? Well, information networks are only valuable if everybody speaks the same language, so we can all talk to each other. So money, whether you want to look at it as a unit of account or however it helps you to get to this point, if you have a good understanding of what money is, you understand it's more valuable if everybody uses the same money. And actually, it's not even money unless everybody actually uses the same money. So because of that, you have people that are smart and they're competent and they're working on Bitcoin. And then you have people that are just really scammers, frankly. They're some of them actually have pretty prestigious, academic backgrounds, but there's a lot of money to be made if I can create this competing protocol, even if I know, because I'm competent, that it'll never beat the other protocol, and that protocol development is always a winner take all game. If I build this competing protocol, I can get a bunch of people to give me their money. And I think that it's so tempting in this space. I don't think anything like it has ever happened before in the open source software world, that there's just a lot of incentives to build garbage and then shill it. One of the ways that you can know that this is happening is just ask yourself, or find somebody else that can look through and kind of verify this stuff. How many ideas from other projects like Monero have made their way to Bitcoin, and how many altcoins like Monero have taken ideas from Bitcoin? And the answer in this weird ecosystem of scammers and actual competent people that are trying to make the world a better place is that to date, there's never been one thing that came from any altcoin project that made its way into Bitcoin. Not once, which is really weird unless all these guys are scammers, or unless, either all these guys are scammers, or the Bitcoin team is really backed by the Bilderberg group and they're so stubborn. Like and it's open source, so it doesn't even make sense. But for some reason, everybody that has an interest in Bitcoin is just really stubborn and won't take good ideas from anybody else, including the people that just showed up yesterday, of which there's probably dozens. And on the other hand, these altcoin projects, yeah, I struggle to come up with any other way to think it through, because it's so obvious when there's nothing good coming from altcoins into Bitcoin. And when you look at any of these projects, like from from my perspective as a security professional, they're laughable on the surface, right? Like, no, it's not going to work. I'll give you an example just to beat up on Monero a little bit more. Or Litecoin, actually. A lot of these, in fact, if you know this one thing, you can probably eliminate 80% of all the altcoins out there. So what you have to understand about the security model behind these cryptocurrencies is that essentially it's destroying or using up valuable resources in order to prove that you've done a bunch of work to confirm a transaction. So electricity, right? Like I'm going to, as a miner, I'm going to spend, $5,000 of electricity right now to and I'm going to do it in a way that's provable and is easily verifiable to say these are the transactions that I've seen and they're all legitimate, right? Which means if I've spent $5,000 on that, I have a lot of skin in the game. I don't want the whole network to reject my work, because if they do, then I'm out that $5,000 and I don't get a reward, right?
Right.
In order to make that work, though, you have to burn that electricity as efficiently as humanly possible. Because if let's say that I burned $5,000 of electricity, but I don't know, I just used an old crappy computer, then what that means is that the amount of work that I did, like the proof that I have that I burnt that $5,000, is something that can be produced on a really fast, efficient computer for maybe $500. And that would mean that essentially, as far as anybody being able to verify, I've only actually spent $500 worth of resources, even though I spent 5,000 because I did it inefficiently. The only thing that I can actually prove is $500 worth of burnt electricity. And so what you need the network to be able to do is burn electricity, burn that resource as efficiently as humanly possible, because otherwise you can't prove it, right? There's always the possibility that I've gotten a hold of some alien technology, and that when I tell you I burned $5,000 of electricity, I've really only burned $500. But if I'm working at the height of human capability, which is somewhere around 10 nanometer ASICs, then you can be sure that when I show you evidence that I spent $5,000, that I actually spent $5,000. Monero and all of these other guys, knowing that people don't get that, especially new people in the space that are going to be suckered, said, let's just throw that security concept away and let's go with ASIC resistant mining algorithms, which basically, I mean, it's the most retarded thing in the world. It's basically the idea that we're going to create an algorithm that that can't be run on efficient hardware, which is impossible because eventually somebody will take the time to make efficient hardware. But in the meantime, a lot of people will use their crappy old computers, and that's great for marketing, right? If somebody thinks that they've made $5, even if they spent $5 in electricity to do it, you've got them hooked. It's good for marketing. So you've got that engine rolling. But it's terrible for security. But if you're trying to screw people over, it's a really good idea to go with that route. So just knowing that one thing about the security model of these cryptocurrencies, you can eliminate Monero, you can eliminate Litecoin. Number 2 coin is still in the running, but you can eliminate that because I told you it's stupid. Let's see. Most of them, Grin, right? Grin's not even out yet. You can eliminate that one already. It's a terrible idea. So yeah, it's kind of, at times it's frustrating to be even slightly competent in this space, especially when you feel like the stakes are as high as, abolition or, spending our retirement years under a state. But yeah, that's what we're doing.
Hey, fair enough. Yeah, I guess interestingly said. Yeah, I hadn't thought about a couple of those things before. Definitely had not. But we're about an hour through, so I guess let's change gears a little bit, if that's all right, unless you have any other, I guess, final thoughts on Bitcoin or altcoins.
No, not at all. That was fun, but glad to move on to fresh pastures.
Yes, and something, I guess a more positive subject now. So you put out a video titled "Code Illiteracy is Stupid," and this is like that was that was one of the first ones I watched because this is something that's been on my mind. Reason being, for the past few years, I'd been, like my biggest regret had been not learning to code and program when I was, like 17 or 18 or 19 or whatever. And my brother and I have talked about this before too, and we both kind of we both regret it. Like it's too late now. Like what are we gonna do about it? But in your video, you seem to have a different opinion there. That's someone in their mid-20s or hell even before the age of 40. They should there's really no reason for them to not learn how to code and program. So I guess would you speak to that? So why should everyone learn how to code?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm glad we're talking. I think it can help you with your career planning a little bit here, and hopefully some other people listening and it'll help them too. So I think the best way to go about thinking about this is to imagine that you're around like right after maybe the internal combustion engine was developed or invented. And the reason that I think that's analogous is that provided a means of solving a lot of human problems that we didn't have before. We basically had horses providing most of our mechanical energy if it wasn't a human back, and all of a sudden we had this machine that could just hum along. Maybe not yet, right? When it was first invented, it was a bit of a disaster, but it was obvious that it was going to work to anybody that spent any time on it and can see how much improvement was being made. And it was also obvious that it had just an insane number of applications, like an unreasonable number of ways that it could improve people's lives. So if you were back then and you were in your mid-20s, would you say, I missed it. I missed the boat. Like maybe 5 years into the engine being invented or 10, would be like, there's no point in me learning how an engine works now. Even though it looks like for some reason, these freaking mechanic jobs are kicking around $200,000 a year with 10 years of experience or 15 years of experience. I think I missed the boat. I don't think I'm going to learn how an engine works. And software is like that, but even more, because the number of problems that we can solve with software it seems to be basically unlimited, right? Like if you can think of a single job off the top of your head, I'll tell you how software is going to, if not replace it, replace 98% of what it does. You couldn't have done that with an internal combustion engine, right? If you were talking to a lawyer and they said, well, how is an engine going to replace my job? The answer would be, it's probably not. But I can tell you right now, I wouldn't suggest anybody go to law school, because I know a lot of people that are spending a lot of time writing code that's going to make that degree a lot less valuable. And that goes for everything, from truck drivers to people that work in fast food restaurants, actually, to brain surgeons. So we're living through this computer revolution. It definitely is not something that's in the past. It's absolutely in the present. And that's why we're willing to throw a ton of money at anybody that's willing to learn this crazy magical art. But it's really not. It's not crazy at all. It's just applied logic. And this whole conversation, all we've done is we've referenced words to communicate ideas. It's far harder than programming. So there's really no reason to be intimidated about it.
Yeah, and I guess to provide a little background. I mean, I've run websites for the past 4 years or so. So like my HTML is on point, and I know not that HTML is hard. Even teenage kids on MySpace had to do that to make their profiles look cute and funny and such. So that's not a big accomplishment. But I've gotten about halfway through CSS. But I mean that's really good to hear.
It doesn't get any harder than HTML and CSS. It really doesn't. I'm sure there's some professionals right now that are going, what are you talking about? But it doesn't get any harder to learn it. As you get better, you'll be able to run, right now you're running a 16-minute mile. But I guarantee you getting it from 16 minutes to 14 minutes is harder, or as hard as getting it from 14 minutes to 12 minutes. So you're going to be able to solve harder and harder problems the more competent that you become, but that the pain or the labor that you put in to learning how to write HTML is as bad as it ever gets. You're going to at some point learn algorithms, and those are going to be challenging, but the amount of energy and effort that you have to put in at any given moment is going to be the same. So it's just a matter of just rinse and repeat. Just keep learning, keep building layers. No layer is really much harder than the last layer. Yeah, you're going to run into frustrations. You probably ran into frustrations with HTML where the freaking logo wasn't in the right spot or the picture wasn't there. And so you've already experienced sort of what it's like to apply logic and problem solve. And math is the exact same way, actually. I mean, the only reason that people are intimidated from learning how to program is that they're really afraid of math, and they know that they're similar. They have a good intuition about that. They're actually identical.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I went to government schools, and yeah, math was always I got basically all A's and B's, but math was always like a D. So yeah, that's the
Yep.
so that's the fear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is incredible that that the government can take something like logic and convince kids that they can't do it. Because if there's one thing that humans are good at, it's logic and reasoning. If we're not good at that, then we can't even have a conversation. We certainly can't work through any hard problems. We can't, rub two sticks together to create a fire. But somehow, with enough dedication, they manage to put together a system that convinces people that they're unable to do it. But math, like I was saying with HTML, math isn't hard because it's just additional layers of abstraction, and you lay those layers down one at a time. So like if you throw multiplication in front of a 7-year-old that's never worked on math before, he'll figure it out, but he might struggle with it. But if you teach them how counting works, and then you teach them how adding works, and then you teach them that multiplication is just adding the same thing again and again and again, then there's no like real leap there, right? Like it's very incremental, it's very logical, it's very reasonable, and kids are happy to do that. Of course, the government schools don't do that. They make you spend time on things like clocks, like the number of hours
I remember that. Yeah.
Kids. So, yeah, I mean. So if I was to put together a system to make you feel stupid, I could not do better. Like I honestly, at one point, I created a bulleted list of all of the things, sort of like the threat model, right? Like, let me be an evil son of a gun for a minute and think of how I could destroy a kid's mind. And I made a bulleted list of all the ways that I would teach math to do that. And I am not exaggerating. Every single one of those things is perfectly checked off. So just for a couple examples, when you're first learning math, you're basically learning a 10-base number system. Different civilizations have used, like, I think the Babylonians used an 8-base number system. Computer code is written in a 2-base number system, but none of that matters, right? Like, everything that you're learning when you're first learning math should be a single number system, and we use a 10-base number system. So you have 0 through 9, right? Mm-hmm. Or another way to say it is you have 1 through 9, and then once you have to write 10, then you go to 2 digits, right? You can only do up through 9 before you have to jump to the next digit and move a number over and return back to 0. Mm-hmm. So if you want somebody to really get comfortable with that and master it, you would work in that number system, and then you would teach them, from, like I said, counting, then addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You'd go through it systematically. What the school system does is they make you spend as much time as early as possible in as many different number-based systems as possible. So you're trying to learn how to multiply, but you're also trying to memorize how many feet are in a mile and how many inches are in a foot. And you're trying to figure out this weird thing where you've got this clock that counts numbers, but for some reason the damn thing goes to 12. It doesn't go to 10. It doesn't go to 9. It goes to 12. And then it does 12 again. But then there's this other layer where it goes AM, PM. So it's actually 12, but it's 24. But I mean, all of these things are not ideal to put in a kid's head at the same time, right? If you wanted to maximize confusion, hit them with as many of those things as possible at the same time. And that's exactly what they do. And the other thing that you should do is you should have them, just for another quick example, you should have them do things as repetitive a way as possible, because there's joy in logic and there's joy in problem solving. Our brains are hardwired to where if you solve a problem, there's actually a chemical reward. You get a dopamine hit, right? So you can actually become addicted to problem solving and making the world a better place. Actually, it's an interesting thought experiment. How could you teach logic and problem solving and avoid having any kids experience that chemical reward? It's really maniacal. It's not at all obvious how you would go about this.
No, it's certainly not. But yeah, that's everything I went through in government schools. And I mean, from an early age, I mean, math was just this thing that I thought I was just incapable of doing math. I thought I was, and it's kind of took the wind out of my sails for a long time, and that's probably the reason why back when I was 17 or 18 or around that age, where coding and programming, oh, I'm not smart enough to do that. Hell no, like there's no way in hell I'm smart enough to do that. So math's involved. I can't do that. So
Right.
so yeah.
So I'll answer my own question. This is how you would do it, and this will probably bring back some memories too. You would teach a procedure, and you wouldn't allow there to be any problem solving involved. So instead of presenting a kid with a problem like, "Hey, you've got 9 eggs, and you need to make 3 equal piles," or let's say you've got 10 eggs, and you need to make 3 equal piles. Tell me how you're going to do that. That's a problem, right? And you could say that that's what division is. That's the definition of the word division. And the kid would sit there and he would probably come up with 3 piles of 3 and have an egg left over.
Mm-hmm.
But when you told him, yeah, that's the right answer, he would have that joy, that reward of having solved the problem. So how can we teach you division, something like that same problem, without doing that? We don't let you actually learn math. It's pretty impressive. So instead, because if we give you a problem and you solve it, you're going to enjoy it. How do we give you a problem, but not give you a problem? And the answer is we tell you a process. We tell you a procedure to follow, right? So the procedure is you write down this number, and then you write down that number there, and then you draw this line, and then you do this, and in the end you get this, and that's your answer, right? In that process, you're just an idiot in a line filling out a form at the DMV. You've done no problem solving. So what they actually did in order to pull that off, this is how maniacal it is. They tell you that they're teaching you math, but math is problem solving. So they don't teach you math. They just call it math. They use the same symbols. You have a roughly similar experience in some ways because you're writing down numbers on paper, but you don't actually ever do any problem solving. So you actually never do math in public schools. It's pretty evil.
Yeah. Wow. And I know the major thing I ran into, and this was a major problem. And, this is one reason my grades were, so bad in math is like I didn't understand it the way that they taught it. And you have to show your work in a particular way if you don't follow the exact process they tell you to. And you do it some way different, well, that's wrong. It's like, well, no, I came to the same answer. How is that wrong? Well, nope, you didn't show your work in the way that I wanted you to. It's like, well, that seems a little backwards, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it sucks all of the. I mean, it would be like if somebody told you to build a bench that was comfortable to sit in, and you created one with a curved back, and they said, no, that's not right. Right. It just removes all of the opportunity for creativity and joy and exploration. Figuring out how the universe works is fun. It's what we're built to do, is to explore the universe. And yeah, they've really made it a miserable experience. And it's too bad that it spills over into programming because the best way to get rid of these monsters is, like we were talking about, to build tools. And you're gonna have a hard time coming up with any tools that you can build without the most powerful tool that we've ever come up with, which is the computer on your side. So yeah, it's not hard. You just have to. It's just another red pill. It's another layer of indoctrination that you have to peel off. And a good way to do that is actually my project. If you go out to mathbot.com and you sign up and you just play through the levels, you're gonna feel like you're learning HTML again, right? You're gonna get that same sort of experience. It's pictures instead of words, just to take some of the fear off of it. But you're actually doing functional programming. It's all a Scala backend, which is kind of the highest paid and most difficult programming language around right now. And by the time you get done with it, you'll be a lot less fearful that you can move on to other things. Eventually, we're going to have it so that we can replace the images with words, so that you can see just by hitting a button the switch back and forth to see that you're actually writing Scala code, which will be really good. Mostly because it will just encourage people not to be afraid because they're already doing it. But yeah, start with that, and then you can hit me up on Twitter too. For anybody that's listening, this is the career advice that I always give: go to Mathbot, play through the levels, and then hit me up on Twitter and ask me what to do next. But anybody that's starting from scratch right now, like if you're not making at least $50,000 a year, you can easily be making $50,000 a year. And I always try to go really conservative so that nobody comes back to me in 5 years and says, well, I've got like one droopy eye and patchy hair and I'm only getting paid 48,000. But if you're starting from scratch right now and you work, let's say 60 hours a week, right? Let's say you're a single guy and you're willing to work 10-hour days for the next 5 years. You're definitely going to be making $50,000 a year. Like there's no doubt in my mind about it. And it'll probably be 100. And that's because there's just so much demand for people that can solve problems like this. And I mean, you wouldn't want to be living in a world where gunpowder is invented and you're running around with a bow and arrow.
Right.
Don't be that guy, right? Like put in the work to freaking figure out how to make gunpowder and then run around with a rifle like the rest of us.
Yes, exactly, and that was the I guess the final subject of discussion for this evening, and that was Mathbot. So you kind of laid out the beginning of that, and the idea here, if I understand correctly, is you're teaching kids how to program, or I guess teaching kids and adults programming and math through operating a little moving a little robot around. And I guess the question I have, because I've played through the probably like 6 or 7 levels, and I would have played through more, but unfortunately, I might have run into a couple of glitches, which we can talk about. But I guess how is I've heard you say that a bunch of times, and then going through the levels, I don't understand how this is teaching me programming and math. Like I don't understand it. So could you break that down for someone like me?
Yeah, totally. So when you're first learning programming, what you want to do is you want to do the simplest thing possible. So a lot of times that's like creating a number or creating 2 numbers and then adding them together, something really, really basic. The way that we approach it in Mathbot is you write a command to have the robot step forward once. From there, you could write a function, which is just a group of commands, maybe to have the robot move forward 3 times. And then anytime you need the robot to move forward 3 times, you can use that function. So let's say that you have, let's say you take the bunny rabbit picture. I think there's a bunny rabbit picture in all that in your options. And you say, all right, anytime I need to move forward 3 spaces, I'm going to use the bunny rabbit picture. What you've actually done right there is you've written a function. That's it, man. It never gets any harder than that. So then it's just additional layers of abstraction. Now let's say that we want to write a function for the robot to move forward 3, turn right, move forward 3, and maybe use the right-hand turn symbol for that, or the rocket symbol, or the hook symbol, or something. So then what you would do is you use that symbol of hook, and you would use the rabbit, and then the right turn, and then another rabbit. Well, now you've created layers of functions. And it doesn't, that's all programming is. You just look at a problem. It's usually a really simple problem. You write a small function to solve that, or you look at a problem and it's a bigger problem and you think, all right, what are the sort of patterns that I've used in the past to create functions to solve this? But those actual functions are always really simple. Like the computers are a big box of on-off switches. That's all that they are. There's nothing. I mean, that's part of the reason they're super reliable. Now there's billions or trillions of those on-off switches, but all this stuff is pretty simple, and it's layers of abstraction. So you look at a pixel on your screen, it's white or it's gray. If you wanted to, you could peel the layers back on exactly why that pixel is white or gray right now, and you're never going to find anything other than functions like I just described. Now, there's probably between the light switch that's turned on, or the set of light switches, let's say, that's turned on that keeps that pixel gray right now. There's probably hundreds or even thousands of layers like that, but each individual layer isn't very complicated. And if you really wanted to, I'm sure there's papers out there where people have done. You could just go through all of those layers. So what's great about Mathbot, and what's great about like logic and programming, right? Like multiplication isn't hard. It's just adding something again and again. Exponents aren't hard. It's actually easier than multiplication. Like 3 to the third is you're just taking 3 and you're multiplying it 3 times, right? Which is just adding multiple times, which is just counting, right? Like all of this stuff is, because it's all an exploration in logic, it has to be simple at every level. If you're ever working on programming or you're ever working on math and you have a moment of frustration, it's only because you have a bad teacher, because it's not possible that it could be anything else. Your brain is built for this. Everybody is really capable of it. I mean, unless you're injured or, if you're a typical healthy human being, You're totally engineered to be able to do this. And so if you ever get to a point where you're like really frustrated, it's probably because you're not trying to take the next step. You're trying to jump 7 steps, which incidentally is another way that the public schools really like to teach math, is they don't do it systematically and carefully. Everybody from, let's see, how far back can I go? Alexander the Great. Everybody from Alexander the Great to Einstein had a math textbook that they learned math in, but you've never heard of it. It's not a coincidence. It's because the state destroyed it and got rid of it. But it is exactly like this. It's called Euclid's Elements. You start with the ability to just create a circle using a compass and draw a straight line. You go all the way through Pythagorean theorem, some really interesting stuff. And it's all very systematic and incremental. And there's never a moment in that entire volume where you're ever frustrated, because it's very clear how these shapes connect together and why they connect together, because the guy was a decent teacher and he did it in a systematic way. So now, the one thing that I will say is there's no Euclid's Elements for programming right now. So you're going to have frustrating moments because you are going to be trying to jump 10 steps. And sometimes you have to do that and it's messy. But as long as you know that that's what's happening, right? As long as you know it's not that you're dumb, it's just that the resources aren't quite there right now. You're going to have to kind of hack your way through it and come back to it and go do something else or ask a friend. Then, it's not so bad.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I've done like the first 7 or 8 levels of Mathbot, and it's interesting and entertaining. Yes, it definitely is. I will just mention that just because if I was putting together a project and there were if someone was having issues, I'd want to know about them.
Oh yeah.
So there were I've tried it on 2 different occasions and I've stopped because these 2 reasons. So there are times when I'd run the function and the play button would disappear, and I have to go back to Mathbot and mathbot.com and go through the login process again and go back to the puzzle. But there was, quite a few times when I've tried to do it, Auth0 just kind of spun and didn't actually log me in, so I couldn't actually get back into the puzzle. So I figured I'd mention those to you just so you're aware of them if you weren't aware of them yet.
No, it's super helpful. And it's a good thing to point out to everybody that's listening too. Mathbot.com isn't finished yet. We're in progress. So you probably are not going to want to use a mobile device yet. Chrome on a Mac or Chrome on a Windows box is the most popular browser that's being used right now. So if you do that, you're less likely to run into bugs. And we're still building it. So right now, I think we've got about 40-ish levels up. We're going to be putting out another 10 within a week, and then another 10 more a week after that, because we kind of got through a difficult problem. But yeah, you're going to run into bugs. Sure. Both of those bugs, fortunately, we did know about, and I think they're both fixed. So if you see them again, definitely hit me up on Twitter. It's a very iterative process with software. So what's kind of interesting is that learning how to write code is really easy. But even doing something as simple as this program is actually not simple at all. There's dozens of layers of abstraction involved. So what that means is that there's dozens of developers that are working on different parts, and we're pulling in solutions from different people. Like you mentioned, Auth0. This is a pretty popular website for managing your login stuff. It's terrible. I mean, they've got tens of thousands of users, but it's garbage. So as somebody that understands Austrian economics, that there's a ton of opportunity here, right? I mean, a website that sucks and all it does is it just asks for your new username and password and validates it. In fairness to those guys, it's probably a much harder problem than I give it credit for, because it usually is once you dig into it. But it just shows how much opportunity there is there. On the other hand, if we pull this off, we get to put out thousands, maybe millions, if we're lucky, of school teachers out on the street, with a "will work for food" sign. So it's not easy, but if we can pull it off, it'll have a really big impact. So yeah. Join us, man. Learn how to code. I'll help you.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, it's a really, really great project. I think you mentioned in other places that, or in other episodes that, there's ways to incentivize children to, using Bitcoin to actually, learn math and programming and have fun doing it. So you want to speak to that real briefly?
Yeah, there's been I mean, it's kind of silly to say this because it's obvious that that especially if you're an Austrian economist sort of person, it's obvious that incentives are incentivizing. Right? It's obvious that rewards are motivating. But there have been studies that just to appeal to the group that doesn't like a priori logic, but there have been studies in the public schools where even if you go into like the worst school, like the worst inner city school with the worst students, and you say, I tell you what, if you get above a B, I'll give you $50. So every time you get a B or better on a test, you get $50 or $10 or whatever number they used. I can't remember. There's been a lot of studies that show that test scores greatly improve. And in fact, I think it's one of the things that's obvious about that is that the students would start they would have an incentive to start holding teachers accountable, right? Like I got a B, well, you didn't explain this very well, and I studied and I tried, whatever, right? So I think there's some side effects of that they didn't like, but it's been done in public schools. It's well documented. Now they're not doing it. And the reason that they're not doing it is actually amazing. I was actually talking to somebody on Twitter today, good guy. I think he's a libertarian dude. But this insidious piece of propaganda has not only been used to completely remove any accountability from teachers, but it's actually, like a lot of this garbage like Keynesianism or whatever, it's seeped into the whole culture. So this guy is thinking like, I don't want to reward my son if he learns math, because then it will remove the inherent joy of learning math.
Huh.
It's mind-boggling to me. So in other words, if you get rewarded for doing good things, you won't do good things for the joy of doing good things. That's not how the universe works, man. We do good things because we want the outcome, right? Like I'll build my neighbor's fence because I want my neighbor to enjoy his fence. Now, if you're telling me I can only build my neighbor's fence because I just enjoy fence building, like what the heck kind of crazy standard is that to put on kids? Like I would never learn anything if it was just for the joy of it. I'd probably just sit around and paint my face all day or something. And it's not how humans are built. We want to do meaningful work. We want to make other people's lives better and solve problems. And the way that we often keep track of that is the resources that we have at our disposal to do that. So the idea is that if you learn math, you can get a little bit of Bitcoin. Well, that allows you to buy things that you want to buy. Maybe it's stuff that you want to buy, right? Maybe it's an ice cream, or maybe you want to buy your sister something. You want to do something nice. That's not demotivating, right? It's not demotivating to have more power over the universe around you. That's pretty much what we're trying to do half the time just to stay alive. So the basic idea in Mathbot is, once we get to this point, we're still working on the basic programming levels right now. But like I said, we should be done with that in the next month or so. We're going, and we've already designed all the levels through exponents. But let's say that you have a kid and you want him to learn exponents. You can say, I'll basically pay $50. And as the kid passes levels in learning exponents, he'll get $2 or $3 every time he passes a level. And what's nice about that is that then we can take maybe 10% from that and use it as tips for all of the developers and all of the people that have worked in marketing and other places to get the word out about Mathbot and just contributed to it. So that's kind of how we're planning on funding the project. But the great thing about it is that's how humans work, right? We want to solve problems and we want to get rewarded for doing it. And it makes for a really smooth transition, I think, because if kids have learned how to do difficult things and enjoy the fruits of their labor, there's not like this weird moment where they have to actually go solve other people's problems after, spending 8 years learning, American literature in college, and now they actually have to care about somebody else to feed themselves. So,
Right.
I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir quite a bit with some of the economic incentive stuff, but that's the basic idea. We don't have that code written yet, though. So it's not live right now. Mathbot will always be free for everybody to play all the levels because our ultimate objective is to put all the public school teachers out of business. But if you have a kid or you have if you've got a kid or a grandkid, or we're experimenting a little bit with a charity in Venezuela where people can, it's not up and running yet, but but we're trying to figure out how to make it work, where somebody could maybe pay $50 and have a kid in Venezuela learn programming, and that kid would be rewarded with 90% of the money that's donated as they pass levels. One of the nice things, though, that this highlights is how amazing Bitcoin is, because we couldn't do this with credit cards. If Bitcoin did not exist, I could not reward kids in this way by paying them when they pass levels in programming.
No, payment processor, shut that down.
Well, I mean, even if they liked it, which I don't think they would shut us down. I mean, in the sense that we're not we're very politically motivated, but if you go out to mathbot.com, it's just learn math and programming, right? Like, hopefully, none of the statists actually want to kill me, even though they know my objective is to put all the public school teachers out of business. At the end of the day, I'm building a piece of software that makes it really easy to learn math. I've actually had a couple public school teachers that are using it in their classrooms already. I'm fine with that, right? Geez, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking of this one public school teacher I was thinking about. She teaches special ed, and I was just wondering how that was going, because she's trying to teach kids that actually have learning disabilities math using Mathbot, instead of taking kids that don't have learning disabilities and using math to convince them that they do, so that they get mentally neutered with chemicals like Ritalin or whatever else they're shilling these days. Sorry, completely lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
Hey, I think you were talking about this wouldn't be possible without Bitcoin.
Yeah. So the reason that it wouldn't work without Bitcoin is that, one, you have fees with credit cards that you don't really notice as the buyer. But basically, everything that you buy with a credit card, everything that you buy anywhere is roughly 3% more expensive, just because of the credit card fees that the seller has to cover. And they're not allowed. Like, if you had a hamburger stand and you wanted to charge $10 for, a hamburger, Coke, and fries, and then you wanted to charge like $10.30 to cover the credit card fee, the credit card processors will shut you down. They won't let you do that, because the Visas and the MasterCards that have these government-sponsored monopolies, effectively, they don't want to make it transparent that they're making all of our stuff more expensive, even on fees. But if you take that to the e-commerce world, which is, what this is, you don't actually have anybody standing in front of you. It gets a lot worse. Because if you're going to pay with a stolen credit card, but you got to walk up, that's different. But there's a market for stolen credit cards. And so you've got the fees, but you've also got a certain number of your sales are going to go to people that don't actually own the credit card that was presented to you, which means if you're like shipping out shoes, this is really bad.
Chargebacks, yeah.
Yeah, the chargebacks will kill you. I mean, if you sell somebody shoes for $100, and then the credit card processor tells you, oh, that wasn't actually the owner of the credit card, you just have to eat that. Which, if you're making a 10% profit margin on selling shoes, the next 10 shoes that you sell are just to make up for the last fraudulent purchase. So what that means is that we're not actually paying 3% more for our stuff. We're probably paying closer to 10%. Because of those chargebacks and the fees. So that would be a big issue. But no big deal, right? 10%, I would just have to hold back 20% in order, it would suck, right? Instead of being able to pass on $9 to the kids, okay, fine, I can only pass on $8 for every $10 that gets sent in, but I can still make it work.
Sure.
But the thing that really makes it impossible is that if you give me $10 in a credit card transaction, and then I find a way to give you money, which I don't even know how I would do that, right? Like, I'm gonna have all of the kids sign up to be merchant processors so that I can give them a Visa credit or something. Like,
yeah,
that's not practical at all. But even if I could do that, even if I could find a way to do that, maybe I do a direct deposit into the kids' accounts once a month with their balance or something goofy like that. That's very demotivating. Even if I could pull that off, I still couldn't do it, because if grandma gives me $10 and then I give $8 to little Susie, but then it turns out grandma didn't really give me the $10, then I've actually shipped out cash to somebody, right? And I can't pull that back. So I would be stuck $8 poorer. And if that's not bad enough, the attackers and the hackers and the fraudsters would find out about it, and they would just drain me out. So what's nice about Bitcoin is that once I have it, and I can send it on to somebody else, and there's no chargeback risk. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting applications like Mathbot because this capability just didn't exist. And frankly, it didn't even exist before Lightning, right? Like part of the reason that I haven't enabled this in Mathbot is that I know that I really need Lightning to be able to do this because it's the only way that I could have it be instant and low fee in a predictable way. So we're just getting started, right? Like the applications are really, really interesting. Lightning is, like I said, as we sit right now, there is not an app for the iOS that allows you to use any cryptocurrency that has any chance of being secure and be money and send transactions instantly. And there never has been. People overstated the capabilities of Bitcoin and other things, but as of right now, we still don't have that. So
Sure.
there's a lot of opportunity to improve things. And as a programmer, it's just everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely agree. And that was one thing I really liked about Mathbot was kind of that incentive I guess additional incentive program beyond just learning. You get a little Bitcoin if you learn this math, Johnny. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great. So I don't have anything else on my end. So I'm sure I could go on. I'm sure we could go on for another 2 hours. But I think this is a good start. We can always have you back on. So I guess do you have any closing thoughts for the listeners? Anything you'd like them to take away from our discussion today?
Yeah, I guess the theme for me today is don't let government run your life. And I know that that's trite, but there's a couple ways that you can take back power, right? One is you can build tools that change the landscape of the world that we live in. And the other is you can take advantage of the tools that are out there to navigate the world on your own. So don't drop your kids off at public school or private school that's essentially a public school with a better veneer on it. Take advantage of tools like Mathbot, Khan Academy, where they're not too bad and they don't have too much Common Core that they're shoving down your throat. And raise your own kids, buy your own food, and leave the government out of your life as much as possible.
Hell yeah, I can certainly get behind that. So I guess last thing, it's on screen, but for the podcast listeners, where can they find you?
Check out mathbot.com, mathbot.com. And then you can also reach me if it's not Mathbot related. Or even if it is, you can reach me at jwweatherman.com or on Twitter as weathermanIam.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, JW. It's been a great honor, especially after watching all of your interviews, and I've found them all valuable. So thank you for all of your work and for taking some time this evening.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, awesome. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you. libertyunderattack.com. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream today. We'll talk soon.